allihopa! Vad kul att ni är här. Hi everyone. Welcome to the Gothenburg City Library, to the International Writers Stage, and to this conversation. And a warm welcome to you, Eileen Myles.
Thank you, Athena.
You are the guest and the main topic of this evening, the main character.
Wow.
And I'm so happy for this opportunity to be able to talk to you. I think a lot of people wanted to, and I got the opportunity.
Oh, great. I'm glad to meet you.
So I'm super happy. You're on a Sweden tour. You were in Malmö last night in a conversation with Jenny Tunedal. Tomorrow night you'll be in Stockholm talking to Tone Sjunnesson. And then you will be back here on Friday, I think, and at Textival and talk to Kristoffer Folkhammar. So it's really a Sweden tour.
Yeah.
And is this your first time in Sweden?
I mean, kind of really. I've been in Sweden a little bitty, you know, maybe one day, 2 days in Stockholm a few years ago. And yeah, very briefly. This is long Sweden.
Yeah.
This week. Yeah.
So our conversation will go on for about 45 minutes. And in the end, there will be time for some Q&As. And so, you all know this probably, but I'll introduce you and say that you're an American novelist, poet, playwright, performance artist, journalist?
Yes.
Yes. And teacher of creative writing?
Sure.
Yeah.
And former presidential candidate.
Yes, I wanted to mention that, but I didn't know how serious it was. It was
very
actually
serious.
Very
you
serious.
Can't do it and not be serious.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you were born in 1949. You grew up in Boston, and you've lived in New York for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And your novel Chelsea Girls was just translated to Swedish by Helena Eriksson, published by Modernista. And it was out in 1994, right?
Yes.
In America. So it was quite a while ago. And before we go on, I would like you to read a little bit from it.
Okay.
Yes.
I think I'm going to read from a section. There's a story, a chapter called Bread and Water, which is the oldest part of the book, and it's about being a poor lesbian living in New York City and having no money and thinking about that all the time and having a girlfriend and the two of us being desperate little animals, but having a good time, I think. And so... I think it's a list of debts. The phone's half off. The power's gone off tomorrow. I am unemployed. So the girlfriend's name is Chris, but somehow I call her Merchard because it sounds more French. Because we're being as pathetic and romantic as possible. The power's going off tomorrow. I am unemployed. So is Merchard. I owe the woman in the bakery $4.65. I'll have to be flirty when I come back. I owe Mario across the street $3.59. I owe Vince upstairs $2. I owe Bruce next door $10. Philip downstairs $5. Greg $5. Rose $25. Andy $5. Richard $5. Ted Greenwald $5. Vicky $15. Helene $100. Gertie $150. Susan $110. Dee Dee $1. Lots of dollars. So many dollars I can't remember. So many dentists, 2. And of course the Harvard Coop, $30. I woke up with no Tampax, blood streaming through my jeans, so I took them off and I'm walking around like a giant 30-year-old baby woman with olive green towel between my legs. Fell back to sleep that way with my diaper on. Merchard goes down and gets the mail, a rebate check from the Harvard Coop for $2.41. Breakfast, Tampax. I pack my jeans with toilet paper and the two of us stroll to the check cashing place. The guy shakes his head at my teeny endowment, deducts his, and I get $2.01. I shake my head. Merchard suggests we go to the Certified on 2nd Ave where we can get everything but probably steal. It turns out to be associated, but what the fuck's the difference? So I don't point it out. Cram Tampax down my jeans, buy some eggs. Mershad's got a taste for ham, she says, so we try Shacks, too dear. Spanish place on 6th and 1st has cheap ham. 2 rolls at the bakery, 40 cents. We've got 16 cents left. Heat up the rest of the coffee. I do the eggs, she does the ham. Everything's great. Sun streaming onto our roaring breakfast. Butter, salt, pepper, everything being wolfed down by 2 lesbians per se, while the cat countlessly assaults the trash bag, and Mershad hurls her across the room. Once or twice. We let the cat, little Andy, lick our dishes on the floor. The coffee's all gone. We'd love another pot. And also, I suggest a big, tall glass of good orange juice. She agrees. Would you like a glass of ice water? Okay. I'm washing the glasses, setting them up, dropping cubes into the tall iced tea glass and the shorter, broader beer mug. I set them out. We're sitting in the sun, drinking our water. I'm smoking. Mershad's talking about really quitting today. I should too. I prefer, but since I have no idea where the next pack is coming from. But I'd love to smoke. She'll probably quit, at least for a while. Ula hasn't called yet. Mershad's going to do it today since I'm gushing blood and want to stay home and be cozy and warm. If Ula hasn't called by now, it's 2:45, so we lose $15. Start planning the other afternoon. She goes to the refrigerator and pulls out a couple of beers. A 6 wound up left from last night. Our future. The phone rings. Mershad's chugging her beer. I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late. Do you think I should have another beer? Maybe she would bring a couple. Ula would like one. Would that be cool? No, don't bring it. So I get to go get one right now. There, pop. That's all times falling into each other. Mershad's still putting on her brown leather gloves. I mean, Chris. She's looking English, French, American, lesbian, not dyke. There's a difference, at least right now. I'm looking at her standing there, looking at her in her orange construction boots and everything else dark. I'm really adoring her as she's leaving, and by the second she's getting more and more beautiful. Look at her eyes all green and golden, brown and gigantic. And those unreal lashes. 2 are caught between her nose and her eyes, are just sitting there. And you know how people who you really love or who you irritate are always coming over and picking something off you? Well, I can't even tell her I like those 2 lashes just where they are. Her entirety goes out the door. Eileen's entirety is lying on the couch, watching TV, waiting for them to turn us off. No.
Thank you. What is it like to read from a novel and talk about a novel that you wrote 25 years ago? Because it sounds like you wrote it yesterday when you read from it.
Right, right. I mean, it's still like it's like a song that I wrote, so it's written for my voice.
Yeah.
And so my voice still suits it, and so it still feels comfortable. Like it's like as if you had every shirt and every piece of clothing you ever owned, and you could just go into your closet and put on the ones that feel good for today. So it's kind of like thrifting in a way. But it's also very strange because it's like I understand that I lived like that, and then some part of me is completely shocked. So it's kind of like something that's very close and distant at the same time. And that chapter itself is actually was very diaristic too.
Yeah.
Like we just had the typewriter out and we were just writing while it was happening. You know.
Really?
So she probably went out the door and I probably jumped up and got on the typewriter and wrote it.
I must confess, when I was invited to host this conversation with you, I was a bit confused, with the fact that I would be talking to the poet Eileen Myles that I've been reading for so many years, and that I think that you're known in Sweden among Swedish readers as a poet, mostly. I mean, for how, your ways of sort of reinventing the language and the topics of contemporary poetry. I was a bit confused about, talking to you about a novel. And what is it, I mean, is that confusing for you, being a poet, being celebrated as a poet at the same time being a novelist, presidential candidate?
Right. I mean, I think I wrote the novel to make a safe place for the poet. I wanted to have like a, because it's always like, I mean, poetry is actually very stylish right now in the States. It's having a moment. And it hasn't, like when I first started to write poetry in the 70s, it was very popular. And it was like poetry and rock and roll, and then 80s, not so much, 90s, maybe a little more. So it's just changed every decade, but right now it's very good for a poet. But I think it's sort of, when I wrote this, I was mostly thinking that I wanted people to know there was such a thing as a poet and that they lived this way, you know, and kind of enter into that history of writers' lives and writers living in these crazy, excessive ways, which was mostly, you know, there were so many male stories about that, about, you know, whether it's Genet or Henry Miller or Jack Kerouac, and I just wanted to make kind of, you know, it's sort of like there's no institution. I mean, in a way, the library is like the institution of the poet, but there's no building. Like that's where we put poets, you know. So I think a novel. I mean, there's other novels that do it too, but I think a novel has that capacity to kind of show the poet walking around and having a life.
But it's funny because the protagonist in the book is constantly preoccupied with the fact that she wants to write poetry, and at the same time, the outcome is a novel.
Exactly.
So how should we describe this novel, Chelsea Girls? I mean, it could be described as many things at the same time, as sort of what you just said, as creating a place for the poet and also the female lesbian poet within sort of this urban underground. It could be a testimony, a witness account of a specific time and generation in sort of urban queer America. It could be some sort of coming-of-age story, you know, consisting of all the sort of necessary parts, the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, the desire, the romance, and also the story of how a writer becomes a writer.
Yeah. I think the last one is my favorite one.
Yeah. Why?
Well, because I think that's what it is, even though it's about, you know, like all the other things you mentioned, you know, and sometimes is affiliated. Like I think even when the book first came out, the publisher was Black Sparrow, and they were very rich and very successful on publishing the novels of Charles Bukowski and the poetry of Charles. So I think they thought they had a female Bukowski when they got Chelsea Girls.
And they were right.
A little bit, yeah. But I feel like it's for me it's so much more about the act of composition. And it's just like like you said, it's like a poet learning how to write a novel. Like this is the book I practiced on. So it's sort of like when I read it, I see myself growing up as a writer. You know, like the chapter I read from was the first one, and after I wrote that chapter, I thought, okay, I'll write another chapter, and then I waited about a year till I had a good idea, and then I wrote that, and it just was like learning to ride something and watching it grow as you were so it was very magical, you know, and so I think it's for me that it's just the act of composition and writing itself.
Right. Yeah. But you know, when it comes to stories and fiction, I always think that there is a reason why something is possible to write at a specific time and a specific place. Yeah. I mean, why was Chelsea Girls possible to write and publish in 1994 as opposed to 20 years before or today? I mean, why then? Why at that specific time and place was a female Bukowski sort of possible and necessary?
Well, that's when I finished the book. You know, because I really thought the first I started, it took me 14 years.
Really?
Yeah. But it wasn't, not because I was like working hard for 14 years, but I would write.
You had to live.
I had to live, and I had to have, the stories came kind of poetically in that, like I said, I wrote one chapter, and then I waited until, I mean, like the first chapter in the book, which is about being arrested and all this kind of crazy stuff. It's like was a story I had in my brain for a while, but I didn't know how to write it. You know, so I had to wait for it in a way. You know, and I think there's a certain kind of, if you're a novelist that knows how to be a novelist, you just sit down and write your novel. But I didn't know how to be a novelist, so I had to wait and figure out each way. Like all the chapters are different. In fact,
very different. Let's come back to that. But I wanted to ask you about the reception. How was this female Bukowski received? And how has the reception, because it's a book that still lives somehow and continues living, which is a remarkable thing, you know, for any book, for a novel. And it's sort of has a renewed life now with all the translations, the Swedish translation, etc. Do you feel that the reception has changed over these 25 years, or has sort of time caught up with the novel somehow? Yeah. Now it seems like, well, and for one thing, I think it's like having a telescope and looking at something through the opposite end. You know, it's sort of like now it's sort of, and also because because it is very like fragrant. You know, I mean, it isn't just because it isn't like a smoothly written book, because it's sort of a funky book. It really lets you know what the time was made of. You know what I mean? Like you can practically see the sidewalk. You can practically, you know, you're stealing beer. You know, it's sort of like it's not glamorous unless you think how wonderful to be
in your 20s and 30s and stealing beer and taking speed and hanging out and just like the days they were like different days. They were just like I felt like I would spend days looking at the hair on my arm, you know, and just thinking about things. You really spend a lot of time in the daytime with people, which I don't do so. I mean, people don't do that so much now. So I think that what was normal then, and so when it came out in like the 90s, people were like, "Yay, Eileen's written a novel," you know, and it was like my friends were excited for me. But and so it had some success, and at the time I was doing performance, so I memorized several stories and I toured it like a performance, you know, and that's what I knew how to do. But I think when it came out like 3 years ago, again. Well, for one thing, the book had been very expensive. You had to go on Amazon and pay $100 for it or something. It was crazy. And people
Speaking of money, speaking of money that you mentioned in the book.
Yeah, but and so people would have very dirty copies they would share with people and stuff like that. So I think it's sort of like it came out. It was kind of a media event when it came out, and I think what it was it gave people a way to. It wasn't like a person in their 20s who had done, I mean, I think there have been books recently where people have done a ton of research on the 70s and 80s and written these perfect novels that say just what it was really like then. But this is not that. This is the dirty artifact of actually being there. So I think it has this allure that at the time it was too close and too disgusting, you know, except for people who really applauded that life. Yeah. You know, but it was a little troubling, I think, for some other people.
But is it also about the lesbian topic and the queerness of it? I mean, how society has changed since then?
Yeah. And I think, again, I think there's excitement about that and even there's transness in it too, I think. Yeah. And I think, again, in the 90s, it was hard to find a publisher because everybody was like, what is the demographic? How many people would read? Publishers were like, what, so 100 people will read this book? You know, there wasn't much of a sense that there was there was a subculture then, but I think publishers are very nervous and don't really trust themselves in a way. They trust what they think is powerful and will make money and so on.
When I read your book, I thought about a phrase that immediately came to my mind, which is by the Canadian writer Anne Carson, and her novel, The Autobiography of Red, which is about this queer red monster, Geryon. It starts with this phrase. Let's see. Here. It's like this. He came after Homer and before Gertrude Stein, a difficult time for a poet. I mean, a lovely phrase, right?
Yeah.
But when I read your book, I thought to me it's very clear that Eileen Myles is a writer that comes after Gertrude Stein. That you have a very sort of Steinian syntax and gaze upon urban life, and that you also refer to her and mention her in the book. So I wanted you to say something about sort of the Steinian connections.
Well, like
when it comes to composition, you know.
Yeah, well, if you look at her books, they're like voice prints. They're just recordings.
Yeah.
I mean, she just lets her voice stop and start, and she repeats things, and she says things over and over again, and she talks about herself talking, and she celebrates her own female genius.
Yeah. Yes.
She's shameless about talking about what it is like to. I mean, and she did the brilliant thing of figuring out like that. After writing all these weird experimental books for such a long time and everybody rejecting all her book, she did the incredible thing of writing a novel about herself by her girlfriend.
Yes.
You know? I mean, you know, the autobiography of Elizabeth Toklas is one of the great Andy Warhol-type gestures of self-recording, you know? And so I think she's just such a fine, amazing postmodern artist. I think she's like the person, and she's a model, like, the 20th century began laughing at Gertrude Stein, and it ended revering her. Yeah. And it seems like that's such a model for a female career, is to like, fine, let them laugh. I'm a genius, you idiots. You know? And she really taught me to listen to my own voice and use that instrument. I mean, she's in love with the vernacular and says that's where language comes from, and indeed it's true.
But then you've written a lot about Allen Ginsberg, for instance, in this book, in the poems. And then you're also sort of claimed as the last of the New York School poets, somehow. So I feel that a lot of people sort of claim you.
Right.
That you belong to many different sort of poetics and schools. Do you also have a self-understanding of sort of the eclecticism of your work? I mean, belonging to many different sort of aesthetics.
Yeah. Well, you know, when we were in the elevator and you were talking about various Swedish poets and you said, well, it's a small world. You know, and the poetry world always is. Like when I got to New York in the 70s, what was amazing was that I had read Allen Ginsberg and then I met him. You know what I mean? Like then you were at the reading and Allen Ginsberg walks up and says, you're really great. Who are you? You know, and gets you published and tries to hook you up with his boyfriend and so on. I mean, he was awesome. And he was like, when I was in New York in the 70s, it was like, there was him and there was Warhol. And you would go to events and if you were like, oh, Andy's here, we're like at a good party. You know, or we just, you know, Alan lived in our neighborhood, and so it meant we lived in the right neighborhood. You know, it was like even if the culture didn't think being a poet was important, Alan saw us. So it was that strange, I mean, like, those guys were interesting because both of them wound up being somebody who always went around with a camera. I mean, the world had been looking at them so much, and they had been so famous that what they started to do to make themselves comfortable was take pictures of you. You know, and so you felt seen by them in this amazing way, you know, and so it's just like, I think it just so happened that the room was really small, and like I remember going, Alan read with Robert Lowell one night, you know, and then there was a party at Alan's apartment, and so I remember standing there, and I was like 25, and I was like, okay, this is crazy, there's Allen Ginsberg, and there's Robert Lowell, and I'm at this party, and this is what I do with my life, you know, and it just wasn't unusual. It was just like the scale of the world, you know? And so I just happened to be of the generation who was there when a lot of those guys were even younger than me now, and then they weren't. And then, you know, it's that thing where, like, I remember a poet saying, somebody said years ago, well, how did you get famous? And he said, well, if you stand around long enough, people are bound to start paying attention to you. Yeah. You know? And so in a way, I mean, I just felt like I met all these people, and then they all started dying, and then suddenly people were like, you're a beat, right? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I was like, you know, I went to Iceland a few years ago for a beat day, and I was like, okay, you know. But I mean, indeed I do. I mean, it's like, I also was a generation where, like, there was a show on TV. I mean, beatniks were on television, you know, in the 50s and 60s. And my puberty, the end of, when you would go out for Halloween, my generation, we would go out as beatniks, you know, and it was a way to be male at that time. I could go out as a boy beatnik and nobody would be upset, you know, and so that was just drag was part of it and beatnik was part of it, and it was just like, it was a career ambition in a way.
Right, yeah. Speaking of money and debt, that you read, and this will to become a poet. I heard that last night in Malmö. You talked about the fact that writing was something that you had always been stealing from capitalism. Yes, yes. So, since we weren't in Malmö, I want you to say more about that. What does that mean?
Oh, I guess time, and I guess, I don't know. I mean, I guess what is the act of writing? It's sort of like something that, it's almost like time that nobody wants or nobody knows that you have, you know what I mean? And I think when I started to write because I actually wanted to write novels before I wanted to write poems, but the thing about poems is when I was in my 20s, I could finish a poem, you know, and I didn't even know how to begin a novel, you know? And so poetry seemed like the right currency to use, but it was more like I would be standing at work. I would be in college, and I would have a part-time job, and I would be at some register selling something, or I would be waitressing, and there was always downtime, and you were supposed to look busy, you know. And so writing a poem was a thing you could do. It looked like you were looking at your receipts, or you were, you know. So you were always kind of, in a way, always taking poetry from the man, you know. And what I noticed, like when I got out of college, and I thought college was going to bring me to some new world. And I realized it just brought me to the same old crappy world, except now I had a college degree. And so
it has happened to all of us.
Exactly. So you'd be standing at the lousy job writing a poem. And it just, at a certain point, I just had this revelation. I looked at the poem and I thought, what if this was, I wrote a poem at work and I thought, what if this was real? and the job wasn't. You know, and it was just an amazing thought. It was just like stealing the whole reality from work and just walking out and not going back anymore, you know. But it was basically, it was for a long time, it was their time. And I was just taking it, you know. And I think the difficulty now, I think, is trying to figure out who to steal it from. I think now I have to steal
because it has to be stolen in order to be alive somehow.
Occupied in a way. It's sort of like it's time. I mean, time is always parceled out by something and somebody. Even, you know, doing this. You know, we're not writing now. We're sitting here talking about it. And so you have to, in a way, I think maybe once you have a career, you have to steal time away from your own self-publicity to write.
But do you feel there's something sort of inherently subversive about poetry because of this, because of what you were describing, because of this possibility of escapism and also sort of this non-efficiency somehow, you know?
Yeah. And also the betrayal, the underlying betrayal that is in all writing, because it's always, you're always sitting here innocently being a person, and in fact you're recording like a weirdo, and you're going to go and use that stuff later on. You know, so that in a way, that's the thing. You mean, like, what is that famous Joan Didion quote about never trust a writer? They're always selling somebody out. You know.
You mentioned this, like speaking of Gertrude Stein, you mentioned the fact that her novels sound recorded somehow, and when I read Chelsea Girls, I have the impression that the language is very unmediated somehow. That it's a very direct flow of impressions and events, spontaneously written on the spot, and that's what you also say. But of course, I think this is not the case,
right?
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's very sort of thought through, very mediated in order to be able to create this feeling of immediacy, you know. But why was this quality of immediacy important for you? And how did you achieve it somehow? This flow?
Well, I mean, in a way, the only thing that is valuable and beautiful is the fact that you're alive and that we're here and that we're present. You know, I mean, like, it's sort of like, that is what's great. You know, moments where you're in the middle of your life and suddenly you realize where you are and what's happening. It's like when you're in love with somebody and you're like, oh my God, you know, you realize it's like after many job interviews, you realize, oh, this conversation is different. I'm actually getting hired. You know, or after many dates, you were like, oh my God, we're in love with each other. You know, it's like there's all these moments in life that are so, but it's sort of like, how do you reproduce that in literature? How do you know, so I think it's sort of like a lot of floundering and a lot of failing. I mean, nobody wants all the garbage of anybody else's mind. You know, nobody wants, if you could record your mind. I mean, that's why the phrase stream of consciousness is just such a crock. You know, because it's like, yes, consciousness streams, but it also, like, you know, it takes lefts and rights and it stops and it's stalled and it borrows things that other people have said and it gets distracted and there's a sound and you turn and, you know, it's sort of like, it's like a mess, you know? And so in a way, I think in order to kind of showcase those wonderful moments of existence, I think you have to erect something that isn't sort of an accidental looking machine, that it's sort of like, that looks like, this is just nothing. And suddenly it accidentally breeds this moment that's sort of spectacular in its quietness and its sensation and its, you know, and it's sort of, so I think it's sort of like that you have to do a lot to make natural look natural.
Right.
You know?
But for me, it's also very associated with urban life. Somehow,
yeah,
I mean, it's a way of sort of describing urbanity.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, that's the Walter Benjamin thing about shocks. Like in the city, you're just getting shocked all the time, and so you're just bouncing against other people and having other, you know. And I think too, so writing a writing that reproduces that sensation is part of the desire. Right. Because it's sort of like not everybody gets this opportunity to live in the city and live in this incredible collective way, you know, and to find yourself and lose yourself repeatedly in the city and its culture.
I wanted to ask you about memory. Because for me, there's a very strange thing about Chelsea Girls. Because I've read it, you know, once, twice, but after having read it, I almost don't remember it at all.
Oh, I have the same problem.
And it's And it's a very peculiar thing, because it's not a memorable book. It's not because it hasn't made an impression on me, because it really has. But I think it is about what we're talking about, because it's so absorbed with the present somehow, you know, and this stream of impressions, people, events, that it's almost like all these events erase themselves, you know, once they've taken place.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, yeah.
Because it's so packed with people and events, and it's like it vanishes.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's presence that vanishes.
Yeah. Because that's what the present does.
Yeah.
And that's
basically.
And that's what the city does. That's what's so shitty and so great about the city, right? It's sort of like New York is horrible. It's sort of like, it's really, it's beautiful because it's ugly. You know, because it's New York, it's always tearing down some beautiful thing and putting up some crappy thing. And you're like, you know, and then you weirdly either get to love that or not, you know? And it's a simulacra of itself, and it's just like, and I think it's always been that way. It's this crappy thing that's selling itself all the time, and you're kind of trying to depict it or live in it. But I think this thing you're saying about the present is so beautiful. I think it's really true. You know, it's like, that is the nature. I mean, in fact, also evil things you've done, you know, like in New York, somebody will do, it's got to be true here too. It's like you do something terrible and people think, whoa, we'll never want to hear from that person again. And then in a few years, it's like, there they are, back again. Like, what are you doing? And they have a whole story and you're like, great. You know, and they say, what are you doing? And you're like, that's incredible. You know?
But I think there's one exception to this, which is the story about Robin.
Oh. Tell me what kind of exception it is.
I don't know. I wanted you to answer because I talked to my friend.
We pretend I know Robin, and we pretend it didn't happen.
No, but I talked to a friend of mine who'd also read the book, and he agreed about this. You know, the fact that the book sort of vanishes because of the strong presence, and then we both said, but Robin sticks.
Huh.
Because there is something very sort of, Robin is a lover of the protagonist, and there's a chapter about her, and it's sort of described very differently from all the other chapters, I think.
Yeah.
It's slower, it's more intimate, it's more vulnerable somehow.
Huh.
Do you agree?
Well,
because my question to you was, what's up with Robin? Is she the great love?
Yeah. No, but I think she was desire itself. You know? It's like, what is it about certain people? You just have this messed up, you just want to have sex with them. You just kind of like, you can't stop it. You know, like they just smell like sex to you, and you just have to have that person. You know, and every time you do it, like, I can't do that again. I must stop that, you know? And then you do it again, and you know, it's just like this machine that goes until you figure out how to get out of it, or the conditions end or something. I mean, it's even in my building where I live, there's a restaurant that used to be this crappy, like the Hells Angels used to live across the street from me. And so they parked their bikes in this horrible dungeon of a little space at the bottom of and we had sex in there once. And it's so funny, that place isn't there, and the Hells Angels aren't there. Everything's gone, you know, but I will just never forget having sex in that raunchy place with that person. You know, this is fiction, of course, we're talking about. But I mean, it's just, so I think there was just that thing. I know, and I think it even starts off very almost the description of the person is kind of like symbolism. It's very weird. I don't know. I mean, I think it was so. Also, it's just like, you know, like there'll be some horrible thing that happened, and then it's over, and then you're sitting outside of it, not far away, thinking, whoa. You know, and I wrote it from that. I mean, I wrote it from not far away, but some distance. And so it was like you could sort of still hear the bomb, too. So I think it had a particular way. I still had those feelings, and I was managing them. And so I think there was danger, I think, in writing about the story. Plus, it's the most graphically sexual. I think it's a story that makes people think I write about sex all the time. Because the way the sex in there, I think, is kind of unforgettable.
It is, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It is. Yes,
yeah. I mean, I think almost if anybody ever thinks that lesbians don't have sex, I think that is the story to correct the impression. You know.
Yes.
And also, I have to say, one of my favorite lines. It's like you know, like before or after the people had sex. I think Robin went over and looked at the person's cassette collection and sort of sneered, you know, in this horrible way that a real hipster was like, this is what you have. And then they put on Patti Smith, and then they walked across the apartment, and it's sort of like, I think it was, I can't even think of the name of the song, but it was like, you know, Little Sister, the Sky is Falling. And it's like, dun, 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 dun. And she walked across the apartment, and the description says, like she was the real Patti Smith, you know? And it's such a mean thing to say
Very
about somebody, but it's really perfect, because it really was, you know, that is, anyway, so it's one of my favorite moments.
I wanted to ask you about violence.
Violence.
Because to me, violence is a very central theme in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, with the drugs, the alcohol, the arrests, the violent urban world somehow.
And also growing up in an alcoholic family.
Yeah.
The violence of watching alcoholism close up as a child.
And there are also fights, rapes, gang rapes, you know. I mean, it's filled with descriptions of violence. People, I mean, a way that you constantly describe people is that she wanted to kill me, I wanted to kill her, you know. People want to kill each other all the time. One chapter is even called Violence Against Women, where the protagonist says about her lover, Jane, I loved her because she had been gang raped. Which is, you know, it's a violent way of describing, you know, the facts. So I wanted to, and at the same time, sort of the violence is described in a very neutral way. You know, it's registered, and they're not, you know, there isn't really a moral gaze, you know, when it comes to this violence. But so I wanted to sort of ask you about the role of violence in depicting all this violence in your book.
I mean, I think that was part of the reason for writing it, because I feel like there's that sense when you realize, you know, when you're alive and you know where the places have been, what the places have been where you've been, and you're kind of in a state of disbelief. I don't know. I have an impulse to reconstitute those places and to depict them, and I think it's trauma. I mean, all trauma means is dream in German, right? And it's just the repeating dream. So it's the repeating. I mean, I think of childhood as a place where it's sort of you were recording like a little camera. You know, you just, in childhood, what's interesting, I think what's interesting about writing about childhood is that what you're doing is putting a voice track on things that you saw but didn't understand. You know, and so you're kind of, you have the pictures, you just don't know how to articulate what they were. But I don't think adulthood is much different. You know, if you were raped, it's sort of like you can't stop seeing it, you know, and yet you're still kind of out of your body in a way. And so what you do, again, it's like what you're doing, and I think what I was saying about the city too, it's like you almost write the city for people who weren't in the city. You kind of imagine, this is where I've been, this is what I see, this is what I have. I think the primary job of the writer is to inventory things. You know, in fact, I think that's all writing is this incredibly tweaked list, you know, of all creation in a way. And suddenly, you know, like, you know, it could be just glass, Diet Coke, photograph, but then suddenly you decide to stay on the Diet Coke a little longer and describe it a little more until you know where to go next. And so but violence is that, certainly. You know, I mean, I feel like this book is about my father's death as much as anything else, you know, and still, like, not knowing how to surmount that vision, you know, and so you just keep surmounting the next one. But I think once something violence has happened to you, you feel like a person who attracts it. You know, I mean, I think there's a tendency to blame oneself in a way, you know, because it seems uncanny that once you start sliding in shit, you keep sliding in it, you know.
Yes. I think now is the perfect time to let the audience in. And do we have a microphone?
Right.
Yes.
We do have a microphone.
So yes, we do have a microphone, and you can just wave your hand. I forgot to tell you before, this is Sweden.
This is Sweden. That was like a
which means that the fact that people don't say anything doesn't mean that they don't have questions to ask. Här.
Since nobody else will, I will. I'm really happy to be here. Have so many questions. I lived in New York City for 18 years before I moved here. I've been here for 13 years. And I have friends in New York that will really appreciate that I was here tonight. And I think they would love to hear what Eileen from 1980 would say the difference between a lesbian and a dyke is.
I think, well, I mean, I think and part of it is really just English. You know, it's sort of like, I think English is so interesting as a language because the Latinate and the Anglo-Saxon are just battling. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the language is the war, and then every other language that comes into the language. You know, it's sort of like it's a language of assault and battle and stuff. And so, lesbian is French. You know, and it's like it's sort of pretty. You know, and dyke is just like it's Anglo-Saxon and it's hard and it's like bitch and cunt and dyke and faggot. You know, it's sort of like those words just have clout. And so I think probably we were much more, you know, pleased to call ourselves dykes, you know, because that's what it felt like. And lesbian had a little bit of like, you know, French murmuring, you know, like, and for a while it was like every lesbian movie always had like a little voice track where, you know, women were softly touching each other through curtains, and there was like a je t'aime, you know? And it's like dyke is not that, you know.
Are you selective now, choosing which word to use, or?
Well, I
not
think
really.
I don't know. I mean, there still is that kind of compulsion in the LGBT community to like say what you are, you know, in a way, and it's, you know, and so I think there's a lot of private like, I prefer a dyke, don't you? Or I think you're really a dyke. That's what I think you are. But I'd like to say lately I'm like a they lesbian. I feel very good about that. Because I think there's a false opposition between trans people and lesbians, and even kind of a thing about, what do you call it, TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists, and to kind of somehow globalize that onto all lesbians. Like the word lesbian is a little bad right now because it supposedly means that you're anti-trans, which just isn't true. You know, it's like, I mean, I think the thing, you know, there's not as much animosity or
Seems
difference.
Like a lot of baggage with that word.
Yeah. So, you're welcome.
Fler frågor? Let's give them some time.
We can have a kind of a,
Titta.
No, I just wondered what happened to your old lover, Chris. I can't remember her French name. I just wondered
what happened?
If you still together, or what happened? Do you still have contact?
Last I knew, she really hated me. And I think when the book came out, at first I think she thought it was cool and it was fun because it sort of like glorified our life together in a certain way. And then I think somebody said to her, "Doesn't that piss you off?" And she was like, "Yeah." And then she went there. And
maybe she didn't expect it to have a 25-year-long life.
I know, no. I mean, I think it must be get weirder and weirder for her in some way. She doesn't live in New York anymore that I know, and I think all the reports I've gotten is that she lives in the Midwest and has a girlfriend and is very happy, you know. And so I hope that she doesn't still hate me, but I don't, you know, we're not in touch. Yeah.
Did you make any ethical considerations when you wrote the book? I mean, because it's launched as an autobiography somehow.
No? I never called it an autobiography.
No. Oh, interesting.
And even in copy, they'll call it autobiographical fiction, but I never called it that. I just call it a novel.
Right, because here it says it renews the genre of autobiography.
Yeah, but I didn't write that. Yeah. I mean, I guess I could have stopped it, but is that a blurb? Is that? Oh, see, first of all, I can't read it. It's in Swedish.
But I mean, did you make any ethical considerations when it came to sort of what to put in it, who to name and how? And
yeah. I mean, my sister's name is not Bridget, for example. You know, it's like everybody thinks my sister's name is Bridget because we weren't talking. Actually, once again, we're not talking, but we weren't talking at the time that the book was published, and it just seemed not ethical to talk about my sister and use her name when we weren't close, you know, and so I changed her name. And I changed lots of, Chris is not Chris's name, you know, I changed lots of names, and then there's just things about my family that I didn't say, I couldn't say, and I wouldn't say. My mother died recently, and I think I know that it opens the possibility to say certain things, you know. But, and also, I think when Black Sparrow explained to me what was libelous and what wasn't. And so you can say that I walked down the street with blah, blah, and I went to the movies with blah, blah, but you really can't say I had sex and drugs with blah, blah. They can then, you know. And so it's just like, you know, I had to protect myself and my publisher, too. But really just things there were things that I didn't want to say and didn't feel. And yet, I mean, it's like, so I think I was ethical within the realm of my own ethicality, but it doesn't mean that I didn't incredibly piss people off, you know. And you know, the thing that's weird about writing about people is that there are things that you think they would like and they don't like. You know, in another book, I described somebody's reading style, and I thought I really nailed him. And I thought, how great that I'm writing about his reading style. And he hated it. And was really offended and just was like, and even my girlfriend at the time was like, of course. And I was like, why? I still don't get it.
Because in my experience, people are incredibly narcissist. Everybody looks for themselves in a book, and they're pissed off if they're not in a book.
Right. They're mad if they're in it, and they're mad if they're not in it. Yeah.
Fler frågor? Kanske någon annan? Yeah.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah?
How cool.
Go ahead.
I know that you use the word they about yourself.
Yes.
Would you want to say something about that?
Oh, it's just the pronoun of.
Det är som hen.
But they is more like several people.
No, I think I think that's part of the excitement of. That's why I like they, because I feel like it expresses the collectivity of a human being, and I do feel like in a given day I will go to the counter and they'll say, "What would you like, sir?" And I was like, "Oh, cool," you know, and then they'll say, "What would you like, madam?" And I mean, like all day long I get assaulted with or identified with by different pronouns, you know, and I enjoy it. I probably enjoy the masculine one more. You know, but I don't like lady, madam. I don't think there's a female pronoun that I'm pleased by, though I don't deny that I'm female. I just think that it's always, the male pronouns don't seem to be about weighing your age and your marriage status. I mean, we know that women are rated differently and they're offensive, you know. But I just feel like I do feel like the kind of fluidity and the diversity that I experience in myself is really expressed by they better than she or he or it, you know. And I had a real experience too with there's that famous quote from the Bible where supposedly Jesus was to exorcise somebody, and to exorcise somebody you have to ask the devil to speak their name, and Jesus says, "What is your name?" And the devil said, "My name is Legion." And I thought, whoa, that's exactly how I feel, you know? And with that, I really thought, then they is that. They is absolutely right for that, you know? And it seemed amazing to, and the idea of being plural was somehow demonic, and yet seems desirable, you know?
I was wondering about how the novel was sort of accepted in a feminist context when it was published, because as you were saying, it's a sort of very early story of also trans experiences, lesbian, dyke, and trans experiences. But you say in the book, I like the men's world and I wanted to be accepted by them as an equal.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking in a Swedish context, in a sort of feminist lesbian context, that could be sort of seen as a controversial thing, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it was, I mean.
Well, I think that, you know, it's sort of like, yeah, depending on when we're talking. I mean, there were times where that would be just male identified and messed up. And yet, women are always invited, encouraged, expected to be ideal. You're always, you know, it's like part of the feminist thing is to be the mega female, you know, and to be able to do this and that, and, you know, and it's sort of like, and part of what I wanted to do in this book was to fail like a fucking man. Yeah. You know, because I think if a woman is anything, she's everything, you know, and gets to be as messy and difficult and complicated and contradictory as a man is, you know. And so, I mean, like, what is feminism? I mean, like, I went to Catholic schools, and there was always an aspect of feminism that I dislike, which is that you were being called out all the time, you know. And so, because we don't do that, you know. And it was like, yes, we do. You know, I mean, I just feel like to be, you know, a bad feminist, which, you know, Roxanne Gay has used, it's sort of like...
And did that remind you of sort of the Catholic schools?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's sort of like, even you know, at a certain points in the lesbian or the queer writing scene, it was like, we've got to write about lesbian reality. You know, like, you're not supposed to write about this or that. You've got to always be writing about lesbians, you know? And I was like, fuck that. You know, it's sort of like, I am a lesbian. I don't have to write about being a lesbian. You know, it's sort of like, though invariably I do. I mean, what I think is exciting, if you belong to a group that's like fringe or supposedly not the mainstream, I think what's really exciting is to write as if your own existence is central without having to refer to it all the time, you know? To have the freedom of being a white man without being a white man, you know, which is to act as if this is the central identity, you know, and that, you know, some of the things that are more problematic now for me are, like, for instance, the first chapter in the book is about going to Maine like a fool, like having the relationship with the Chris character, who then, you know, like, there's things in here that, well, there's things that aren't in the book, but it's sort of like they have a breakup, and then Chris goes to Maine, hooks up with somebody else, invites Eileen to come visit, and Eileen goes like an idiot. And then horrible things happen, and they, you know, there's like, but there's a scene of violence in which Chris is having a fight, like a violent fight in her car with her current girlfriend. A cop comes along. The cop, you know, says, "Hey, stop that." Chris punches the cop in the face. The cop opens the door, starts dragging Chris out, and the Eileen character, like, decides to rescue her. Yeah,
but she's also mesmerized by the fact that she hits a cop.
Exactly. And so is going to go one better. And jumps on the cop's back and tries to flip him. Like, you know, like this, you know, referring to like how, you know, like when the Eileen character was a child, liked to get into fights with boys and get them in neck locks and flip them. And I mean, I love to fight, you know? So it's like that's happening. And then they get thrown in jail, and they're basically charged in reality. We're charged with felonies. We're in a state, you know, we're in a state prison. What I didn't really think about until not too long ago, I mean, I was in Texas. I went to a women's prison one day, and there's lots of poetry workshops in prisons, as we know. And so I was there, and I met all these women who were like, you know, diverse, women of color, poor white women, poor women of all races. And then there was a benefit that night, and it was a benefit reading, and it was all about, and I was gonna like read that story, and then suddenly I had this awareness that, you know what, if I was African American, I would still be in jail. There's no two ways about it. And the story suddenly was a whole different story. You know, so I bring this up because it's sort of like, as opposed to like a feminist reality, there's a political reality in the book that, I mean, it's sort of, I still enjoy the story. I still, you know, love writing it, and I think I wrote it well, and it's, you know, yet there is just a whole racial reality that is just part of America, you know. It's just like, or I would have been shot. I would have been shot, you know. I attacked a cop, you know, and I got away with it, you know. So I think there's a lot of difficulties in the book now that I didn't know about in 1990 or 1980 or whenever. You know, it's a different moment. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a couple of minutes left.
Yes. And
I wanted to ask you to read a poem to end with.
Okay.
If you want to.
Yes, sure. Ta-da! And I think we even talked about. I'll admit we talked about this moment, and so we even talked about a poem.
Yes.
Which here's the.
And I think I even marked it.
Yeah. Thank you. But the thing that's really funny is that I go to the gym. And at the gym, one of the things I do at the gym is I don't know if I can do it here. I'll try. This is sort of great. This is, yeah, this one, you know, where you're building the top of your, you know. So it's an American poem. So it's a minute, if you do this for a minute, you know, for your thighs, to protect your knees. My knees are really fucked up. So here's an American poem. I was born in Boston in 1949. I never wanted this fact to be known. In fact, I've spent the better half of my adult life trying to sweep my early years under the carpet and have a life that was clearly just mine and independent of the historic fate of my family. Can you imagine what it was like to be one of them, to talk like them, to be built like them, to have the benefits of being born into such a wealthy and powerful American family? I went to the best schools. I had all kinds of tutors and trainers. I traveled widely. I met the famous, the controversial, and the not so admirable. And I knew from a very early age that if there were ever any possibility of escaping the collective fate of this famous Boston family, I would take that route. And I have. I hopped on an Amtrak to New York in the early 70s, and I thought, whoops. And in the early 70s, and I guess you could say my hidden years began, I thought, well, I'll be a poet. What could be more foolish and obscure? I became a lesbian. Every woman in my family looks like a dyke, but it's really stepping off the flag when you become one. While holding this ignominious pose, I have seen and I have learned, and I'm beginning to think there's no escaping history. A woman I was currently having an affair with said, you know, you look like a Kennedy. I felt the blood rising in my cheeks. People have always laughed at my Boston accent, confusing large for large, party for party. But when this unsuspecting woman invoked for the first time my family name, I knew the jig was up. Yes, I am a Kennedy. My efforts to remain obscure have not served me well. Starting as a humble poet, I quickly climbed to the top of my profession, assuming a position of leadership and honor. It is right that a woman should call me out now. Yes, I am a Kennedy, and I await your orders. You are the new Americans. The homeless are wandering the streets of our nation's greatest city. Homeless men with AIDS are among them. Is that right? That there's no homes for the homeless, that there's no free medical help for these men and women, that they get the message as they are dying that this is not their home. And how are your teeth today? Can you afford to fix them? How high is your rent? If art is the highest and most honest form of communication of our time, and the young artist is no longer able to move here to speak to her time. Yes, I could, but that was 15 years ago. And remember, as I must, I am a Kennedy. Shouldn't we all be Kennedys? Our nation's greatest city is home of the businessman, home of the rich artist, people with beautiful teeth who are not on the streets. What should we do about this dilemma? Listen, I have been educated. I have learned about Western civilization. Do you know what the message of Western civilization is? I am alone. Am I alone tonight? I don't think so. Am I the only one with bleeding gums in this room tonight? Am I the only homosexual in this room? Am I the only one whose friends have died or dying now? My art can't be supported until it is gigantic, bigger than everyone else's, confirming the audience's feeling that they are alone, that they alone are good, deserve to buy the tickets to see this art, are working, are healthy, should survive, and are normal. Are you normal tonight? Everyone here, are we all normal? It is not normal for me to be a Kennedy, but I am no longer ashamed, no longer alone. I'm not alone tonight because we are all Kennedys, and I am your president. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eileen. Tack allihopa.